Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Now, those of you who are familiar with the term, those of you who have pets might be familiar with the term door dashing. It's when your lovely dogs dash out into the garden faster than your head can spin as soon as you open the door. Why do they do it? Instinct. In other words, because they know that on the other side of that door is the great outdoors where the fleet of foot can scamper and play and run like the wind. Ladies and gentlemen, travel is no different. We are no different. After 2 years of, shall we say, bumpy, restrictive, hellish years, the tremendous appetite for travel has returned, back with a bang. Not only are we ready to see the world again, this eagerness for travel is complemented by changed mindset of destinations and travelers alike. Global search volume is up, borders have opened, well, for most part, and there are a lot more vaccinated travelers and people are desperate to get out and get away. To improve traveler confidence, protect staff, and enable movement, the travel and tourism sector has implemented rigorous health and hygiene protocols, and some countries still require visitors to complete a health form, provide a proof of vaccination, or a negative recent COVID test result. Either way, clear communication and collaboration have been key to improving confidence in the sector. But we know that there will be new variants, and we have seen this movie before. So what more can be done to further accelerate recovery and rebuild trust? I am absolutely delighted to welcome a wonderful panel, 3 amazing leaders who are going to help us get to the bottom of traveler confidence and how best to enhance it. In alphabetical order, please join me in welcoming Ariane Gorin, who is the President of Business Services for Expedia. Ariane is responsible for Expedia's global B2B business, covering an ecosystem of travel suppliers, organization, and partners, from hotels and vacation rentals to airlines, financial institutions, travel agents, and more. Next, we have Clement Kwok, who is the Managing Director and Chief Executive of Hong Kong and Shanghai Hotels, owner of the prestigious Peninsula Hotels. Clement just told us before that he has just finished his 20-year anniversary, a long career with the group. And previously, he had a long career in banking and consulting with PwC, Barclays, and Schroders. And he currently sits on multiple boards, including as a director of the majority of the group's entities. And last but not the least, we have the pioneer of the global visa service industry, Zubin. Should I call you the master disruptor? Zubin Karkaria, who's the Chief Executive Officer of VFS Global, which he set up more than 21 years ago now, Zubin. And most of you might also know him as the former CEO of Kwok between 2014 and 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, it's such a pleasure. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, just as a warm-up, I would love to ask each one of you, if you had to pick one key intervention, one key initiative, which you think has been key to rebuilding and maintaining traveler confidence, amidst all the rapidly changing regulations, restrictions, border openings and closings, what would you pick and why? One key intervention which really you think has been instrumental in rebuilding traveler confidence. Ariane, do you want to have a stab at it?
Sure, I'm happy to start. And I was sort of thinking, well, it's been a couple of years, so do I pick something that's more recent? But I think to me it was, I think it was about last summer, summer of 2021, summer of 2021, when we started to see the vaccine passports that became more prevalent. We saw them in Europe where you could cross borders with them, and we saw them elsewhere. And I think in the areas that were able to allow freer movement across borders through those passports, that was probably the biggest unlock. And we're starting to see it even now as countries open up, remove quarantines and the like. That is one of the biggest things to bring travel back, and also to create confidence of people knowing that those who are circulating will be vaccinated.
Clement, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm based in Hong Kong, and that is the place where the majority of our assets and operations are still based. And as we all know, Hong Kong has had very tough restrictions against COVID, with China pursuing a zero COVID policy. So my simple answer would be protocols, travel protocols that would enable people to travel. As of today, Hong Kong has slightly relaxed a few weeks ago in terms of returning residents, but still it is not admitting overseas visitors. Now, we have only 10 hotels around the world. We're a luxury hotels group. But what we've seen is that the moment people can travel, especially our properties in the US, what you've said is very true, that, pent-up demand comes back fast and furious, comes back very, very quickly. And, we've seen that. And of course, when you say, confidence of travelers, then of course, things like health and hygiene and safety also very important. But the important thing is to have a basis on which borders can be opened and people can travel, subject to, as you said, maybe various processes, but at least offering that process.
Fantastic. We've got vaccine passport, we've got travel protocol. Zubin, you have to come up with something different now.
No, okay. For me, simplicity is very important, and I think integrating all the track and trace apps is very important. We have not managed to do that. So if I'm traveling from UAE, I have a Al app, I'm 5 times vaccinated, I've taken my PCR test. And then if I land in Europe, I have to do a similar download of another app, which is required by a European, protocol. And then I have to do a test again over there and just to, enter a restaurant. So the apps have to be integrated, health, I know there is a GDPR issue that we have faced. We tried to do that with a few countries, to work on integrating apps, but the simplicity, will make life more easier. I cannot keep on downloading different apps every time I land into a country. If we have an app which can be integrated, it should be integrated across all the countries that you're traveling, so that we don't have to redo everything, or prove yourself again.
Would you pick something that worked though? One initiative which you think was good?
I think the Al app in the UAE is pretty good because it's got it's got a lot of records on it. So that means it gives you a whole list of how many times you have been vaccinated. At the same time, gives you a digital certificate which can be scanned at an immigration in another country. I think that works well.
Fantastic. Excellent.
And I just
Ariane,
sort of pick up on what Zubin was saying,
yes.
Is I think this idea of things being interoperable is important because I'm based in the UK, so I live in London, but we were going on vacation last summer in France. And, I had gotten my vaccine shots and was able to upload it into the French app. But because the UK had different rules about the ages of vaccination, for my children, it was actually quite complicated. We had to do their COVID tests in France, then get it uploaded into the app before we went to Italy. So where the EU app worked well within the EU, it was complicated if you weren't actually living there to then figure out how do you do your tests, how do you get it uploaded into it. And we had to spend half a day on vacation just getting the children tested and figuring out how to get it into the app. And I know I wasn't alone in doing that. So I think the more fluid and interoperable it is, the more people will be able to travel while not worrying about filling out these forms or doing the app, just enjoying themselves.
Well, I totally agree with Zubin about having a platform that could be applied to different places. Now, generally in Asia, you'll be aware that the countries are more cautious about the requirements, testing, and so on. But on my way to London recently, I went through Thailand, and they have a system called the Thai Pass, where beforehand you need to be vaccinated, you need a PCR test, and upon arrival, they have a program called Test and Go, where you go into a hotel. There are certain hotels which are designated suitable for testing, and you can test, and then you get the result, and you go the next day. Now, that's not quite just being able to get in without any sort of testing. But at least something like that, in the context of Asia, I think, would make some sense.
So more streamlined, less pain-free. I guess we all hear here. Ariane, I think what you were talking about leads me into perhaps something that I want to ask you, because you have global operations and we've faced so many uncertainties. I mean, there's COVID, there is the US-China trade war. Now we have Russia-Ukraine war. With operations in so many different countries, in your experience, please tell us what you believe have been some perhaps exceptional systems that you think have really enabled ease of travel at a governmental level. And I would also love to ask you, what do you think has been the impact of vaccination rollout on the different geographies where you have operations? And how have you seen business pick up or not otherwise?
So just in terms of the end of the question is how have we seen business pick up? I would say the amazing thing about our industry is how resilient it is and how there's just a need to travel. And so if people can't travel across borders, they're going to travel domestically. We have a very big business in the US, and even when the borders were closed, there was lots of travel within the US. In Europe, we started seeing once borders started opening, people had been traveling domestically, then it was cross-border. And the great thing is we're starting to see that in Asia. So when we look at search volume in Asia for outbound, it's about where it was in 2019. So as restrictions are going away, we're seeing that. So I would just start by saying, running a global business, you do see that when demand is suppressed in some places, it gets picked up other places. And I think it's because there's just this need to travel. In terms of what governments have done well, there's everything we talked about on policies, on the protocols and the like. But I think a lot of governments have really stepped up to support the industry on, providing funding to their destination organizations so that the destination organizations can support our industry. We are 1 in 10 jobs around the world. And so this idea of destination organizations, first of all, when international borders were closed, looking at how to do domestic tourism. We did some work with Singapore when borders were closed with their tourism board on how do you get people experiencing activities locally. And then as borders opened up, doing work with these destination organizations to get travelers around the world who are considering where to go to understand what their unique destination can bring. So I think, whether it's that kind of work or even government support for jobs in our sector, I think this was a moment over the last couple of years where the tourism board really got on the radar screen of a lot of governments and got support that I think we haven't necessarily in the past.
Fantastic. Ariane, just to put you on the spot, name 3 countries, destinations who have done remarkably well. Your top 3 picks. You don't have to name one, so we stay off.
Name 3. Well, you know what? As I said, I think Singapore did some great things because you would think that it would be tough to do domestic, but I think that organization did great work. There was New South Wales actually has done some really great work on their Feel Now tourism campaign. It's an area that was closed off, and I think they've made a big bang as things have opened up. And I guess the last one, there have been a number of destinations in the US that have also done some great things. I will make a plug for the Philippines, which it's not about what they've done in the past, but removing quarantine for fully vaccinated travelers, I think that's going to be something in a few months that we're going to say that was a moment when tourism really came back as well.
Fantastic. Clement, if I can come to you with a few things that Ariane mentioned, because you run a global operations as well, and we've had this VUCA world all around us. But equally, you have a very strong pipeline of new properties, I'm assuming, including the one that's under construction in London. And as a company, you have a very long-term outlook. So how are you managing global operations, long-term outlook with a bunch of short-term challenges?
Actually, the word I picked up from Ariane was actually the word resilience. And that has been such an important word in the past couple of years. And I think that starts with your own people. And I think it's the culture that you have in the company and how you still continue with things like training, development, caring. One example is that recently, you will have heard there was an increased outbreak in Hong Kong. And we put in place specific care programs for the staff and their families who had been affected. So it's things like this that I think have been important at a time like this. And we all know that one of the issues, I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more, is there's great pressure on labor in the hospitality industry. There have been many people who've left this industry, And they've actually discovered there are other things to do besides tourism. So all of us have the challenge of maintaining the attractiveness of this industry. And we all have a passion for it, but you have to then manage that passion in a way that can be applied to people and to increase that resilience. I think the other thing I want to mention here also is we've learned that, of course, we always think of tourism as being international. We're talking about borders and protocols and all of that. But actually, there is domestic tourism as well. And this is something that, we've discovered a lot, that we have found pockets of domestic tourism that we had not seen before. And that is part of what has helped to sustain our business, at a time like this. But, ultimately, in the long term, when you come under the sort of pressure that a company like us has come under, and we're an owner operator, so we own our assets as well as operate them, there's no substitute for just having a strong balance sheet and taking a long-term view and being willing to live through the financial pressures and be strong enough to withstand them and take a long-term view. And that is the basis on which you kindly mentioned we're investing in some new projects, and those are in London and Istanbul. And we're taking a long-term view. We're continuing with those investments, and we have a very long-term outlook.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, then I will come to Zubin. Clement, Ariane mentioned as well, domestic travel. What do you think are some ways in which confidence in domestic travel has changed? And how do you think the wider travel and tourism sector globally can make the most of it? Really focusing on that, because we forget that for a population of 8 billion, we have only 1.2 international travelers at the peak. The remaining are all domestic travelers, and it's about time that we start focusing on that segment.
Of course, all of us will say that in terms of comfort, it is things like security, hygiene, safety, and those are important to all people alike. But I think probably, what I would think of is creating more journeys for domestic travelers. One tends to think of the journey as being coming from overseas. What can I do for the overseas traveler? And I don't want to sort of be too Hong Kong centric in this, but we do have big operations there. And the Peninsula Hong Kong, as we all know, is a very well-established hotel. And we created a lot of experiences in the Peninsula Hong Kong, including things like flight simulator experiences, golfing experiences, and things like this to increase the journey for our domestic travelers.
And if I can just add to that with
yes,
what Clement said, is that's what we've seen destination organizations do as well, is help their members and also on their own create domestic journeys. And saying, okay, here's the 3-day trip through this country or whatever it might be, really targeted to domestic travelers. And that's made a difference as well.
Fantastic. Zubin, Ariane was telling us about governments, restrictions, regulations, which she thought had, phenomenal examples or best practices. Tell us those who you think probably did not have the right policies or restrictions in place, which resulted in eroding traveler confidence. And any ideas or any examples on those who then made a comeback to resolve it successfully? Because we all made mistakes, right? When I say we all, countries around the world. So it's been learn and go.
Yeah, I don't want to point at any government on their, protocols, because each one had their, unique, what they call reasons. Whether it's the size of the population, or it was a geographical spread of the country, or just the worry of the infection spreading very fast and the type of, mutation that was taking place. But what I would like to look at it positively, that every government who went through what they call a reaction in terms of let's stop now, we need to look internally, came out of it very fast too. Though some of the governments went into it again, so they tried opening up the borders, and they felt that opening the borders was maybe too soon, and maybe the reason was that managing the what they call mutations was becoming more difficult. The other was, is the vaccine working or no? Which one is working, which one is not? And is the vaccine working with the new mutations? So it was a learning curve for all governments, and it was not something that it was like one vaccine, one issue, but it was like, do we need to get a booster in? When will there be serious issues with this mutation, or will there be less serious issues? So there was a lot of questions that they needed to ask themselves before they opened or closed. One of the good examples was UAE. They had some issues at the beginning, but look at the way they came out of it. Look at the expo. Last 6 months, the amount of tourists and people, even corporates coming in for the expo, a tremendously great job done in the UAE. The hotels have done better. Hospitality industry has done better than 2019 numbers. And you couldn't get a single hotel room. So they have done extremely well in managing even the second round, the third round. And the number of I would say protocols were reduced, but still managed well. As I said, they have a fantastic app, the Alosan app, which allows you to track, and that can be used at multiple locations. They had free testing services, at the airports, at the expo. So I think the UAE really did a good job over the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months to make sure that, the people that come in for the largest event of the year, what is known in the last 6 months, the World Expo, came in with the confidence. They felt safe. At the same time, they had lesser restrictions or protocols when they went to a restaurant or a hotel. They didn't feel that there was COVID, so that comfort level was there.
Fantastic. I do agree. I think it's been a resounding success, Zubin, the expo. So I do agree with you wholeheartedly. I want to pick up on your point about vaccinations. And because you have operations in 60 plus countries globally, tell us.
140.
140. Oh my God, that's more than double. 140 countries, I beg your pardon. Tell us, Zubin, did you see, if you were mapping your operations, did you see a difference in business with the rollout of the vaccines?
Yeah, see, again, I would say you cannot compare all the countries, because the size of the population, also the geographical spread. Every country did their best to, make sure that everybody is vaccinated. If you look at today, I think 54% as per WHO worldwide has already got the first shot, and 64% have got the second shot. That's I think the numbers today. I feel the vaccination, started a bit slow in some countries, but then they got geared up. Again, it was the variant. The problem was of I would say, I don't know what to call them, the people who did not believe in the vaccine and did not want to take the vaccine. And that made more difficulty for governments to convince them. There were theories and there were theories. And, in some countries, it spreads like, social media says, okay, some people are not taking, why are they not taking? And that became more difficult for people to convince people to take the vaccine. That's why the process at the beginning was slow, till they realized that if they don't take the vaccine, it may not stop the virus getting into them, but at least it does not get them to the hospital or get a severe case. So till the time they realized that the vaccine is at least going to help me to survive if the virus, that's the time everybody started taking the vaccines. There were some restrictions that people, governments put in place that you cannot enter if you're not vaccinated. I think, that is good for the safety of the whole globe and for the people around. So that is good, So then that's where people said, okay, I have to take a vaccine if I have to travel. So those are, I would say, good measures. But when we look at countries who had smaller population and the ability and the financial resources and the governing resources to vaccinate their population faster, those people started traveling more faster than the others.
Ariane,
Aradhana, could I?
Yes.
Sorry, it may not be appropriate for me to butt in at this stage, but I was thinking about the question you asked me earlier and changing the subject a little bit when you asked about what would give people maybe security or what are they looking for in terms of their travel choices. One thing, and you might want to pick up on this a little bit more later, is the importance of sustainability nowadays. Mm-hmm. And I think people are looking at responsible providers of those services. And we've always been at the very luxury end of the market, and people might have thought, well, you can't really combine luxury with sustainability because you are using so much resource in providing the product that you have. But this is an area that I believe we and others have focused on quite a lot in terms of how to provide those experiences with a much greater mindset towards sustainability. And I think this is, this has become an important topic as well. I'd like to see if Ariane agrees with that people, yeah.
Completely. I mean, we did some research, and I'm sure all of us have research on it. The research that we did showed that 3 in 5 travelers are willing to pay more in order to choose sustainable options, and that the 2 in 5 who aren't, they're 2 in 5 who also say they're not going to choose certain destinations because they're not sustainable. So it's both, I have a preference and I'm willing to pay more for sustainability. So I think it's a very real decision factor in people's choices. And WTTC has started a committee on the topic, I think is doing very good work. And it's a question for our whole industry of how do we organize around it? I think it was 3 years ago at a WTTC meeting in New York. It was Chris Nassetta who was on stage who said, you know what, this is a topic, we might all compete with each other on other topics, but climate change and sustainability is a topic that we should be working together on and sharing best practices and figuring out together how do we solve. I think it was very well put.
I think I agree wholeheartedly. ESG is front and center now, right? It's not optional anymore. All things ESG, and it's not just the environment; it's the social and the governance aspect of a destination.
Yeah, so I was just going to add to that point is also in our study, we found that 2 of 3 people were interested, especially the younger generation, in a destination stance on inclusion and diversity. As they were making their choices. So, I think the last couple of years, yes, we've had the pandemic. We've also had the questions of sustainability, of social issues. And I think, obviously, travelers, people expect companies to take stands on various issues. So it feels very different than even 3 years ago.
It's fascinating. I'd love to get all of you in for this question, because I think it's what we are talking about, perhaps about destinations anywhere in the world. Who do you see doing a great job of tapping into this pent-up demand that you were talking about, Clement, in terms of, people are desperate to get away and travel again, and they are waiting for travelers to return, but with a changed mindset. They want to do it right this time, sustainably, in a way which adds value to the community. What pull strategies do you think are really working well for destinations globally? Any of you? I mean, what do you see happening in the world?
I think it's everywhere. I think that you cannot say this is more attractive or that. I think it's the quality of experience that people are going to have. As I said, I operate at the luxury end. I think it's a very personal business. It's a question of understanding what your clients' desires and preferences and needs are going to be and curating their journey for them. And those experiences are quite specific. People will look at what you're offering. Now, some of those factors are clearly important: security, sustainability, and so on. But it's really that, will that experience bring you back? It is a journey that emotionally you feel attached to, and that you want that emotional attachment to come back again. And I think for all of us, in the business, that word emotional attachment has become very important. It is no longer, okay, how big is your room, and are there 2 beds in it, and does it have a restaurant? It is, what emotional connection can you create with the customers? And when you have that, as I said, we don't have many businesses, but everywhere that we are, the moment that the situation allows, there's a lot of demand.
Yeah, and I would say it goes beyond just what one brand can do. It is, as you say, what can a destination do? So in Thailand, we worked with the government there on the UNESCO Heritage Pledge and on working on sustainability for many of the independent hotels there. And each of them could do something, but it was really about what does this represent for the destination. And when you talk to travelers about what can they expect when they come, is they know that sustainability is at the heart. We signed a similar agreement with Atu France and other countries. So again, I think it's what can the destination do to work with its hoteliers and other travel partners there in order to not only create the trips that create the memories, but also this topic of sustainability. I think the one other thing, and then I'm sure you probably want to move on, is destinations. Clement was talking about the labor shortage we have in our industry. And as I said, I live in the UK. There have been very well publicized issues of staffing at airports and long lines and canceled flights and the like. And I think to the extent the destinations can work with their partners on how do we make sure that when people come to our destinations, they have a great experience, and it starts from arrival, that can also really make a difference.
The great resignation, we call it, Ariane.
Well, some of it is the great resignation, right? Which, by the way, is across all industries, not just in travel. Some of it is that, our industry, as Clement said, was hit hard. And now, as we see this boom in demand, it's like, how do we have the staffing in order to respond to it?
Right. Zubin, did you want to comment?
I think ESG is very, very critical, in across businesses. It's not only in the hospitality travel, but across businesses, and we have to take it very sincerely. And I would say, it works well if there is, I would say, a proper public-private partnership in these things, so it can't be just the tourism boards or the government taking responsibility. It is also the infrastructure, the hotels, the airlines, everybody has to work in hand in glove. Secondly is the KPIs, how are they measured? And are you actually tracking and tracing that you have achieved those? We can talk all about ESG and, carbon emissions, et cetera, but are we actually, measuring them? Are we actually tracking them? In VFS, we have taken it to a very serious level. That means it's not only the top management whose bonuses are held back if we don't achieve our KPIs on a yearly basis, but everybody down the line, across to the first, the guy, sitting in a visa center, say in Ethiopia, or a guy, so till the last leg, his bonus, X percentage of his bonus is held back if we have not been able to achieve our KPI, what we have set under ESG. So I think you have to take it, you can't just say ESG at the high level. It has to be a responsible thing for every person in each visa application center. As I said, we have 3,500 visa application centers in 140 countries. Each of them in their center has to do what they have to do to save electricity, to save water, in whichever KPIs that we have given them. And at the end of the year, that has to be measured. So the same thing goes with the PPP. Yeah. So it has to be holistically
and accountable and hold the line to make sure you're actually measuring to manage. Otherwise, it's all good talk. But I'm very keen to come back to the topic. We have only 8 minutes left, so I'm keen to get as much as we can out of you. Zubin, perhaps I start with you very quickly on one of the things that you mentioned, and perhaps Ariane would like to comment on it. You mentioned social media, and this is an interesting one because obviously we know to get the traveler confidence back, health and hygiene protocols have been key. What effect have you seen social media have on traveler perception of health and hygiene protocols globally?
I think good and bad. I would say, social media is see, sometimes it's better to be away from social media and take your decisions than to listen to social media and take a wrong decision. So I stay away from most of the Twitters and the LinkedIns. And I'm not even on Facebook. So I've never had a Facebook account. I'm not on LinkedIn and I'm not on Twitter. So I stay away from that. And I go sometimes with what I see around the world because I travel a lot and I go with my gut feel. Social media can play a very, very important role if it is well managed, in the sense giving the right messages across. And I would say staying away from rumors. I think if that social media really can do a good job, especially to increase the comfort level of the people traveling and to spread out the message of the simplicity to travel in the future. So there are a lot of technologies that the governments have deployed. There is a lot of what we call seamless systems that hotels have done, tourism boards have done. If that is brought up in social media more often, then the comfort level of the people, the communication that we need to do, the comfort level. So if the comfort level of the travelers, for the guys who are not already what we call converted, there is a group of people who are saying, as you said, open the door and they'll run. They have to go anywhere. There's a group of people who are still waiting to say, is it safe to travel? So there is the age gap also. So there could be the below 45, 35 who will say, I'm traveling. I don't care. The slightly older ones will be saying, okay, shall I travel now? Is it safe? So I think social media, if it gives the confidence, if it is used rightly, if it gives the confidence, I think travel will become simpler and safer.
Fantastic. Ariane, I'll come to you, but Clement, I want to ask you first, because Hong Kong is in a very interesting position. It's a strong market with very strong internal demand drivers, but the borders are closed. So what would you say of destinations which are facing these challenges, and how can the wider global sector help destinations which are, so to speak, joining the party late or opening late?
I think the most important thing for Hong Kong is for people to realize that it remains a very attractive destination. Hong Kong has for such a long time had huge strengths in terms of, doing business there. People found doing business in Hong Kong one of the best places in the world. It has great financial markets, a great legal system, incredible people in terms of, executing and working. And it's a fantastic, leisure destination as well, because there's a vibrancy in Hong Kong. You come to Hong Kong for, if you like the culture, the people, the service, and so on. So I think it's important to look a little bit longer term, because at the moment there have been, obviously shorter term challenges. But I think, for us, I remain very optimistic. And the main thing I want to do is to convey that to the international audience and to regain that confidence for people to travel to Hong Kong. Yes, I mean, you've mentioned many of the uncertainties around the world today, which of course are generally not positive for the travel industry. But I think as an investor and looking long term, I think we have to, maybe keep the bigger picture in mind. And China itself, let's not forget that, so many people have had wonderful experiences of doing business and also leisure travel in China. And you say, of course, there's been a trade war and so on. But let's just hope that we'll overcome those things and that confidence will return.
Fantastic. Ariane, a tricky one for you. You can do this.
Oh, wait, I wanted to answer the social media question.
Go ahead, then you have 1 minute very quickly, and then we round up.
1 minute very quickly. I think social media is a very powerful tool if used well. And it's sort of what Zubin was saying, is especially in the last couple of years when there have been so many issues, servicing issues, canceled flights, changes in protocols and the like. And so if as a company, you can harness that to really listen, to be able to respond, there's a way of turning around unhappy yes, if you can respond to them. So I think that's sort of the first thing. And then the second thing I would just say, you were asking for examples of great things destinations have done. If you haven't seen it, Iceland did the funniest campaign right after, when Facebook changed their name to Meta, and then they did this really funny campaign about the metaverse and the Iceland verse. And I think it went viral. It's things like that you can use social media to really make your destination or your company stand out. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going to see that campaign. It was very funny.
I fully second it. But I have to ask you, Ariane, look, we all know there will be new variants in the works. And COVID is an endemic, not a pandemic. We've had lots of countries with zero COVID policy. God forbid, if we go back to a situation where things are getting worse, do you think countries and destinations will go back to that zero COVID policy?
I don't think so. Well, you can't speak in broad generalities, but I think there's a lot of the world that would not go back to it because, A, we saw the economic costs when we did that. And also we saw it's not really possible in most places to have a zero COVID policy. I think people would have a hard time actually following it in any case. So I think it's really about, okay, how do you make sure you have vaccinations, if you need to put back in social distancing, masking and the like, and really learn to live with it. But we talked earlier about vaccinations. In low-income countries, there's still only 13% of the population that's vaccinated. And so for our industry, tackling vaccination is critical. We, as a company, did a campaign where we called it Give the World a Shot, and we donated up to $10 million as people were making purchases in our apps. We did that jointly with UNICEF. And I think it's a real topic that the world needs to tackle and we as an industry need to tackle is vaccine equity.
Fantastic. We are coming to the end of it. I have one last question for you, 30 seconds, no more, please. If I were to ask you to pick one thing that you want to see more, which you genuinely believe will accelerate the recovery and allow people to travel safely and confidently, what would you pick?
well, where I come from, the travel protocols I mentioned.
Yeah.
Travel protocols and removing quarantines where possible, because quarantines are a big barrier to travel.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Zubin.
I would say remove the quarantines. Yeah, if you're vaccinated and you have filled up all the forms before you have traveled, just remove the quarantine.
Quarantines and travel protocols. I think we're at the end of it. This was absolutely fascinating. I can't thank you enough. Ladies and gentlemen, after 2 years of the pandemic, I think we're all tired of putting plans on hold, and we want retribution against COVID-19 and its grip on our lives. Let's make up for lost time. Let's splurge. Let's pull the trigger and travel for real this time. Only let's do it sustainably, inclusively, and mindfully, unlike we have in the past. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariane. Thank you, Clement.